Hey, Mr. Five here. Since the New York State guards have been on strike, 12 people have died inside of correctional facilities. Let's go. Hey, good evening, Mr. Five here. So I want to talk about an incident that happened on December 10th, 2024. This is last year, the end of last year, at New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision inside a Marcy Correctional Facility. A man named Robert Brooks was beaten to death.
Is being filed against the New York prison guards accused of attacking a man who was restrained in a hospital bed. Robert Brooks died just hours after this video was recorded inside the Marcy Correction Center in Utica. He was 43 years old. Today, charges were brought against all the officers involved. With the story, here's ABC's Rena Roy.
Multiple former prison workers now facing murder and manslaughter charges in the death of an inmate at an upstate New York prison. The fatal beating of Robert Brooks caught on multiple body cameras at Marcy Correctional Facility in December. The disturbing footage shows officers choking, punching, and kicking the handcuffed 43-year-old on an exam table the day he was transferred to the facility. Two sergeants and a nurse were simply watching, never intervening, according to a deposition by an investigator.
This is not a rage fuel event. It seems just like everyday business, which just is very upsetting.
Brooks pronounced dead the next day at a nearby hospital. A preliminary autopsy ruled Brooks's death a homicide caused by asphyxia due to neck compression. New York Governor Kathy Hochul ordered 14 prison staffers, including bystanders, to be fired. Today, saying the brutal attack on Mr. Brooks was sickening, and now the perpetrators have been rightfully charged. Brooks had been serving a 12-year prison sentence since 2017 for stabbing his girlfriend. His family calling for justice, filing a lawsuit against the state and the officers involved.
My brother always used to tell me to err is human, to forgive is divine. And I'm not at forgiveness yet.
And so Robert Brooks, a 43-year-old man who died a day after the incident at Marcy Correctional Facility. Now, Marcy's in the Wendy hub. It is upstate correctional facilities. You have Marcy, you have Mid-State, you have all of these sort of mental health, medium, max A, max B facilities within a hub. Let you know there are several hubs, 6 or 7 of them in New York State, because New York State consists of 62 counties. Every county is named after a prison, sad to say. New York State, one of the first states in the union, literally created the prison industrial complex as a mapping system for every county in the state. So there's a facility in most of the counties, 62 counties. Every county is named after a prison, sad to say. New York State, one of the first states in the union, literally created the prison industrial complex as a mapping system for every county in the state. So there's a facility in most of the counties. 62 counties, we have 50-something facilities, right? Out of those 50-something facilities, you have max A's, max B's, medium, minimums, all those sort of facilities, from dorms to cells to supermaxes to solitary confinement units, right? Now, throughout this system, you have majority 80% of people of color, and maybe 90% of people of color are just locked up in New York State. Now, these counties are also counties that are upstate, so majority, like 80% of people in prison, come from only 5 counties. So that's Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, and they basically then funnel up to the 50-something facilities as food to basically feed those counties. When I say food, I mean like people in New York State, and I'll do another video explaining New York State prison system. Basically, the federal funding and the federal government gives a little bit of money towards states and counties for survival, for their means of schools and roads and whatever they need to improve that community through consensus. And so consensus is like a form you fill out that says, how many people live in your state, how many people live in your county, what's the income, what are the people populations, whatever. And because of that population, they give money to that county. Well, that money goes with you when you go to another county. So as people move upstate to like Attica, which was just a jail, right? And then people moved there, built houses around the jail to basically form a town, and that town became Attica. So the prison of Coxsackie became the town of Coxsackie, upstate, Marcy, right? And so these counties became prison towns. And prison towns mean everybody work in the town, live in the prison. Everybody live in the prison, don't live in that town. They come from these 5 counties. Now, the more people you get, the more money you get. So let's say your county gets about, let's say 100, 200,000 per person, right? And so you can get that amount for your county if that person lives in your county, right? So think about it. You have about maybe $200,000-$300,000 per person. How many people in your community got locked up this week, right? Then that money, $200,000 per person, goes upstate to that county. So your community is losing money as their county is benefiting money. The more bodies they get in their county, the more bodies Marcy get, the more people they get, the more black people they get, the more roads they get, the more congressional representation they get, the more schools they get, the more community support they get. They can open up community centers, and they can open up low-income housing. They can get more roads. They can get more legislators in that town because of these thousands of people that live in that town but aren't benefiting from that town. And so the prison industrial complex helps to create this bodies as money, as income. And so most of these people left the city at a white flight, basically leaving because people of color were moving into the city. They moved up to more rural areas upstate. And then this system feeds them people, right? And so Robert Brooks serving a sentence, which means his sentence is supposed to be his sentence. And so if he did a crime, he was committing it. And, you know, he was dutifully prosecuted of a jury of his peers and went through all that process. And they said, okay, you have to do this as a punishment, right? This is your time that you're doing as a punishment. These guards, they send, and these upstate citizens seem to think that it's their job to do additional punishment, to make sure that your time there is the most punishable, is the most torturous, to bring you back to a state of slavery. And that punishment includes cruel and unusual torture plus physical abuse and punishment. And so Robert Brooks was brutally murdered on December 10th by guards jumping him, right? For like 20, 30 minutes, just brutally beating on film. So you see the body cameras. And even though 12 people were indicted, 9 of them were, you know, charged with the beating. There were about, I would say 12 other people, because 10 people got caught up. So 10 officers got indicted, but there are about 12 other people you see in the video just coming in and out, nurses, other doctors, sergeants. They were just like, oh, it's getting beat up. Let me just get some gloves and get out of here. And so you've seen this sort of system of complacement, right? This system that was like, okay, he's getting beat up. This is just business as usual. Just, you know, he's all right. And just kind of left him. They're accountable as well, right? You cannot be a medical professional and be in a room while somebody's being beat to death and just be okay with that. So 12 people are still large that they're not looking at. And then the next week, these guards from other facilities go on strike.
State corrections officers and sergeants continue to illegally strike for a second week as mediation stretches into a fourth day. Alice Gaynor has an update from the Sing Sing Correctional Facility.
Striking workers continue to cover their faces out of fear of retribution outside of Sing Sing Correctional Facility in Ossining. Some, we're told, went back to work Thursday after the state of New York listed names in court filings this week trying to force an end to the strike.
With all the threats the governor's office has made, with staff being served, with their court orders, I understand why someone would not want to be out here.
So some people have gone back to work because of that?
Yes.
Striking correction officers and sergeants say they want HALT reforms rolled back, which reduced solitary confinement. Since HALT took effect in 2022, assaults on staff have spiked, recruiting has taken a hit, and officers have been forced to work mandatory overtime.
And it's putting so many people at risk within our correctional facilities and correctional system.
Meantime, the state confirms 2 inmates died at Sing Sing Wednesday. 67-year-old Anthony Douglas serving a 122-year sentence for murder and rape. He died by hanging. That's according to the Westchester County Medical Examiner. And 35-year-old Franklin Dominguez serving a sentence of up to 6 years for assault. His cause of death needs further study. It's not clear if staffing was a factor in the deaths. The latest statistics available for death in custody show that at Sing Sing for the year 2023, 3 people total died. As for getting officers back inside, the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision released a statement that reads in part, quote, "The confidential talks have been constructive, and we remain hopeful that continued dialogue will bring this situation to a close in a way that ensures the stability of the state's prisons and safety of everyone involved."
Okay, now don't get it twisted. These prison strike is really a repercussion because how dare you charge us with murder? Like, they're just mad because their friends got charged with murder for beating a guy to death, because that's what they do, is business as usual. The HALT Solitary Confinement Act is a bill that, I helped author. I was one of the first founding members. And this bill is really the Humane Alternatives to long-term isolation. It is a change in the way that we treat people, right? When you having problematic issues, you're already away from your family, away from your friends, away from your community. You're suffering. This is your punishment. And you're going through the changes of that. And you may be going through detox, and you may be going through health crisis. You may be going through, physical disabilities. You may be going through emotional disabilities. This may be the first time you ever offered to go to school, right? This could be a chance to rehabilitate you and teach you new ways. But instead, you're faced with perpetual punishment, violence, the risk of your life, and people are dying. And so thousands of officers decided to just walk off their job, leave their job, and go on strike, right? And so this prison strike basically states that we don't have to do our duty. Now, so people who were getting care, custody, and control, people who needed medication just to thrive, people who needed to go back and forth to court, no one is getting their services. Legal aid will tell you that. And so legal aid and I believe it's the Legal Aid Society and the New York City Believers Union is both pressing charges against the Department of Corrections Community Supervision and COBRA, the union, because abandoning their duties has caused 12 people to die. 12 human beings who were sentenced to a sentence of death, basically, because whatever sentence they got sentenced to, they were allowed to die, were let linger and die in New York State. Now, the conditions and the reasons for each death still are being investigated, which means the same people who caused the death will be investigating it and telling us what happened, right? The sad part is that this all really stemmed from us witnessing and a pushback against the beating death of Robert Brooks. Who's Robert Brooks? He was a 43-year-old man. He died the day after the incident at Marcy Correctional Facility. The body camera footage that were released by the officers and the Attorney General showed the correctional officers hitting Mr. Brooks while he was handcuffed and really beating him to death like savages. The investigation, New York State Attorney General Office is conducting an investigation, but it actually ended up being the area's district attorney who ended up doing it. Lolita James, the New York State Attorney General, was like, I'm actually these officers' lawyer, and so I can't go against them, which is crazy. 10 correctional officers have been charged with murder, which rightfully and dutifully so, and the death of Robert Brooks. And it happened in Oneida County, and this is upstate New York, basically at Marcy Correctional Facility, which, let me just say this. Correctional facilities do not facilitate correction, okay? Prisons and jails don't make our communities and our streets safer. We don't bring people home in a better state than when we captured them. And when they're captured, they're forced into a system of labor and other merits that doesn't help them return. Programming is like a battle, so progressives are battling to go into the prison to help people come home when it should be a state responsibility. It should be a federal responsibility. We're not rehabilitating people. And solitary confinement is one of those causes, right? I myself did years in solitary, and it only exacerbated the conditions I had and only made it worse. Solitary confinement is where 50% of prisoners go to die. Majority of people in solitary are suffering from mood disorders and mental health. Transgenders are put there, young people, aging, people with disabilities, physical disabilities, mental health, all of these things doesn't categorize, right? What the guards are really mad about is the fact that they don't have a system of perpetual punishment that they can just use, right? That they can say, you did this, I can hurt you for doing that. You know, I need this punishment to be able to harm you so that you know that if you do this again, this happens, right? So that's just a sort of a judicial system that is doesn't include trauma-informed care and doesn't include, you know, the person's actions. Actually, it just includes a sort of perpetual punishment. Like, you're already here as a prisoner, so you're already guilty. And so every bit of the process to this that leads you to this torturous conditions is horrible. And what I mean is that the judge, jury, and executioner is the person who gives you the ticket. The person who writes the ticket is also the person at the hearing and the person who gives you the sentence. So nobody gets out of these tickets that are done. Tickets are inter-system disciplinary infraction tickets. Think of it like traffic cops, right? So traffic cops go around. They make New York City about $10 million a day just writing tickets and making money for the city by people who are offending the city's rules and laws and regulations by parking or doing these sort of infractions, right? So as a citizen, you break a rule, you get fined for it. As a citizen in the prison, you break a rule and you get fined for it, so the prison makes money. So it becomes a system of pulling money. You get $25 a ticket, you get 20, 30 charges, that's a little bit of money. You've done your job as a guard to make money for the system is paying you back. And so it's a tier 3 system, which means there's 3 tiers. So any charge, walking, looking, reckless eyeballing, growing a beard, changing your appearance, all these things are just how the words are worded. These things can be offenses that could lead to escape charges, but also indefinite time, but also exasperating your sentence or your sentencing or your charges. When you go back to court, you look bad. So solitary has all these punishment abilities that they're able to hold over your head and get you to do things or manipulate you for. When you take that away, it kind of forces the system to address your problem at hand. It forces them to facilitate rehabilitation through the attitudes and the sort of emotions and the actions that you used to have that may have caused you to be here. And so facilitating rehabilitation is also about understanding the need of the person before they were locked up, right? Which might have led to some of the crimes that they've committed. And so if you're robbing a bank or if you're getting money or doing something to take money because you need money, then maybe you need a new system of making money or making income. Or maybe you need a higher education. Or maybe you need supportive housing so that you won't rob places to get money to pay for housing. And so the crimes often outline the need of the person. And so some people are there for what we call survival crimes, right? Things that have been labeled a crime, but it's how you survive as a human being, because food, clothing, shelter cost. The things you need to survive cost. The things you need to stay better cost. In America, everything is a cost. And so without a socialist society, you can't just live, born and just live, right? And so it's a cost to everything. And so without that cost, you have to find that cost or take that cost. And so crime happens. And when I say that is because until we find new means of addressing it, we're just basically banking on perpetual punishment. Is that we're saying that the best of society, the minds and the great of human nature can only come up with locking you in a room and then you're on timeout? Timeout. That's all we can do, right? So the HALT Solitary Confinement Act represents a programmatic solution to long-term solitary confinement isolation, right? It allows for other outside programs to happen. It allows for the torturous conditions to not exist. And that also brings us in line with the Mandela laws, right? With human rights of the United Nations, with which the UN says that 14 days, more than 14 days, is torture. And I think that, in my other video about solitary confinement, and I've done an amazing amount of work on solitary. I think that people can find that easily, especially on this channel, that the perpetual punishment and the impact of that doesn't measure to the means of which those tickets justify you going there. And so HALT was passed after 10 years of advocacy. I mean, I done did concerts at the governor's mansion and petitions with the president and Stop Solitary for Kids and this national movement to bring up that New York started this. New York is the worst. New York has more average than anybody. But, you know, we abolished it here. And then we abolished it in the city and the state, right? So it took a large effort, a big organizing movement to make that happen. I'm proud to be one of the founders of those movements. I'm proud to still be a burning member, still creating tools for other advocates to use. Like, and so why? Right? Because I wasn't getting paid for none of that. Why? Because we have to stop torturing people. And public safety is how you return to the community, because at the end of the day, you're just getting $40 on a bus ticket, right, to come back to the county and conviction. So after 20 years of committing a crime or doing your time, you are now returning to the South Bronx. You are not returning to Harlem. You're not returning to Queens. You're not returning to, right? And so these returning citizens need help and support because there's none given in the prison. Getting out of jail is just surviving. Getting out of solitary means you have no phone calls, no way of legally, communicating with people. And so, these people who were, who died from various conditions, some couldn't make it to court, some weren't able to get their medical attention, some weren't able to get food, some had exasperating conditions and left to die. The hospitals are shut down. And so these 2,000 officers were, I believe, going to be fired. Right, and we need to replace those. And the National Guard was brought into the states to help these prisoners and help these facilities run and operate. 3 of the officers that were indicted on the Robert Brooks case already had prior records, right? Like, I knew some of them personally. I went to Marcy's. Like, I came home from Marcy. And the sad part is that Marcy Correctional Facility is one of the worst in the states. It's a medium that acts like a max A. It's horrible, from going to the mess hall to being in the dormitories to the solitary facilities in the back by the school building. Like, it's horrible. And then, you think about these cases in New York State, right? Docs and the correctional officers have been abusing people for decades, centuries. In the last year or so, I think it was like 5,642 cases were filed, right, against officers of abuse and death and neglect and all these other violations, to drug dealing, to bringing in weapons, to all these other criminal charges, that led to like 28 arrests. 28 guards, maybe, I think, got fired, not even arrested. And when I mean fired, it's like allowed to retire. So you get to sit home and collect your check because you did a bunch of crime and human rights violations of people inside, right? And then, so 14 people in that video, because it was a lot more than just the 9 people that were incarcerated for Robert Brooks, are still at work. 14 of them was like, I'm in the video, this guy's dying, he's gonna die, I'm gonna get some gloves, let me get out of here, I'm a nurse, I'm a licensed medical professional, I'm going back to work tomorrow, and they're still at work today. So, we have this system that we just allow to continue at our expense because we pay for that. We have these upstate counties that think that they're, a couple hours away, so they're out of the woods. We actually need to pay more attention to that. And then, what does the legal aid say about this case? And what are they doing about it?
Known as the NYCLU has filed this lawsuit against docs, claiming prisoners have not had access to legal services since the strikes began more than 2 weeks ago. The suit says denying legal representation violates the U.S. Constitution.
For the past, it's going on 16 days, we have not been able to have any legal phone calls with our clients, or very few.
Karen Murtaugh is the executive director of Prisoners Legal Services of New York. She says it's more than just not being able to talk on the phone.
We have not been able to go into the prisons at all to see what is actually happening in the prisons. But we have gotten hundreds of panic phone calls from loved ones and family and friends about what they're hearing.
The lawsuit mentions at least 5 examples of lawyers being unable to reach prisoners due to the strike. In one case, NYCLU attorney Megan Porter says a lawyer struggled to get in touch with a client ahead of a legal deadline.
There's no clarity or guarantee that if a deadline comes up and they miss it because they can't access the client, if they can't get a client's signature on time that they need for, some sort of filing, or even if a client doesn't have the ability to get physically to their court date, because sometimes the client is required to appear in person at court, there's no guarantee that the court is going to give them a pass.
Even though there is a lack of staffing inside prisons due to the strikes, Murtaugh says since thousands of National Guard members have been deployed to the prisons, legal representatives should be allowed in.
But they do have enough staff to allow PLS to have a legal phone call, or to allow one attorney to come into the prison and sit in the visiting room.
Officials from the Department of Corrections say they cannot comment, citing pending litigation.
I know during the strike, the Legal Aid Society received hundreds of phone calls from incarcerated New Yorkers, from their family members. What were you hearing?
We were hearing absolute chaos and terror from our clients and their loved ones. People being locked in small cells around the clock, people going days without food, people being denied life-sustaining medical care. So it was a truly horrible situation for our clients and, of course, for their family members, and it continues to be a very serious situation for them.
And Anthony, we learned 12 incarcerated people died during the strike. Do you have any information at this point as to whether or not the strike and the strike conditions may have contributed in any ways to their deaths?
I think the strike has definitely contributed to a number of those deaths. When you completely remove staff, completely remove medical care, it is a question not of if people will die, but when, and that is exactly what we saw.
I know you spoke a bit about some of the access to food that people just simply did not have. What about access to lawyers, to legal calls? Were people still able to work on their cases as they might have been able to, had the strike not been going on?
For several weeks, there was pretty much a blackout of access to legal counsel. People were having a lot of difficulty having basic phone calls with their lawyers. Visits, including legal visits to prisons, were cut off. Those have, in some cases, begun to return, but there are still, in some cases, pretty lengthy delays. And that's really significant for people who have ongoing criminal proceedings, appeals, that sort of thing.
Or are they improving?
So things were about as bad as they could be. I mean, if you think of someone with diabetes not getting insulin, someone who has a very serious mental illness not getting their life-sustaining medication, again, creates a ticking time bomb situation. And what we're hearing now that the strike has ended is that things still, unfortunately, continue to be very serious. There are still, in some cases, very significant delays in people receiving medical care, and we do not know at this stage how long that will go on.
Yeah.
Well,
during the strike.
Right. So the National Guard was brought in by the governor to essentially step in for the correction officers who walked off the job. The National Guard members are not trained as correction officers. Many of them are unfamiliar with how prisons operate or are supposed to operate. And so it's certainly far from ideal to have untrained individuals working with incarcerated clients.
Right. I imagine it's a tough job to do, especially if you don't have much training. I do want to go over the deal that ultimately ended the prison strike. A couple of things were agreed to. Elements of the HALT Act were suspended for 90 days. There's now an effort to try and minimize 24-hour mandatory overtime for officers. Also, 12-hour work shifts have been put in place until staffing levels return. I want to go through some of these. The HALT Act was cited as a major reason for some officers as to why they felt it was necessary to walk off of the job. Some saying that limiting solitary confinement, in their view, increased violence in the jails. Well, is that a similar view held by the incarcerated people that you spoke with?
It absolutely is not, and it's not the view that I, as an advocate, or the Legal Aid Society holds. The HALT Act is the most significant and most important reform that we have seen in a generation for incarcerated New Yorkers. If it is fully implemented, will increase safety, will make things safer for both corrections officers and incarcerated individuals. And the idea that repealing in any way or suspending the HALT Act will make things safer is just absolutely unsupported.
The staffing issue, 2,000 officers were fired after the end of this strike, but there are also concerns about these mandatory overtime shifts.
The short answer is better management will help solve the problem. It remains the case that for years now, New York has had significantly higher security staff to incarcerated individual ratios, over double the national average, 5 times that in federal prisons. So the idea that there has been a staffing shortage based on the number of staff members is just not really supported by the evidence. Now, we have lost a significant number of, there has been a loss of a significant number of corrections officers in the last several weeks, and that will take, some a hard look at how things are managed. But there are significant concerns, including in a recent report by the Inspector General into corrections officers misusing workers' comp.
Okay.
And that is a significant, that appears to be a significant contributing factor to what we're seeing. Number one, the state, both the governor and DOCCS, the state prison system, need to respect the law that the state legislature passed. They need to comply with the HALT Act. Number two, they can take immediate steps. It's within the governor's power today to reduce the prison population, get people out of a system that is not working for them on any level. The governor has the power to grant clemency. The governor has the power to grant compassionate release. The governor has the power to use a number of mechanisms to get people out of this situation, and the governor should do so immediately. So the DOCCS does have a grievance process, and DOCCS also has an Office of Special Investigation that is tasked with responding to complaints like the ones that are coming up now. The concern is that those systems are rotten from the inside in many cases. They do not work for people. And so the main mechanism by which people can hold DOCCS accountable does not work, which is why it's also important that there is an independent oversight, one that currently does not exist for cases of serious abuse and misconduct.
Now, despite a 10% drop in prison population, let's just say that this whole, we need more guards and that we're at a loss of staff is just not true. Like, New York State has the most guards in most states. Like, usually it's like 2 guards for every 1 person incarcerated. Or it's a situation where there's more guards than the person that they're monitoring, right? And so there is not an overcrowded situation. There's not an understaffing situation in New York State. As a matter of fact, we have a decreased population. We need to close more prisons and jails because we don't need those facilities open. And we need to stop transferring people to scatter them around the state to keep facilities open when we consolidate. And consolidate meaning saving thousands and thousands and millions of dollars, right? Now, what these law agencies like the Legal Aid and NYCLO have received is hundreds of phone calls, thousands of letters from people's and family members because there's no visits, there's no legal costs, people's cases is done. And the judges may not see that as favorable. Like, you can go to court and the judge be like, yo, you were supposed to be here last week. And you're like, yo, I had no way of getting here. They didn't bring me. It's like, oh, it's not my fault. This case is moving forward. And it could be in your penalty. It could be in your harm, right? So we have a system that's broken. We also have a system that equally doesn't work for the people that it's supposed to represent. You have incarceration no matter what your sentence is. It could be death, right? Just because it's New York State. You may not even make it back to court. You may die in Rikers. Like, people die every day. And so 12 people have died, and we're not even talking about them. We're acting like these people don't exist. We're acting as if their families don't matter, like their lives aren't valid. You know, when you think about not only Marcy, but just this situation that, you know, officers had to be fired, 2,000 of them, that they would walk off their jobs that they were committed to doing, to just maintaining care, custody, and control. But they're walking off their job because they're protesting the fact that they cannot abuse people. What does that say? What does it say when you say, I don't want to go to work if I can't beat this guy up or send him somewhere where they can indefinitely hurt him? If you knew that there was a system that harms people, it's like during the Nazi Holocaust, and they were putting people on trains. The guy that knew that when you got off that train, you were going to die, right? The guy that knew that put you on the soldier, is he not just as guilty as a person who pushed you in the oven that killed you or pushed you in the death chamber that murdered you? He's a part of the system that leads to your death. And so these guards are extended overseers. They are the descendants of slave catchers, and they do not deserve the respect that they're demanding, like they're officers of the law upholding some dutiful job. Your job is harming people. Your job is keeping people captive who have been marginalized by society, and that we all know, some mostly racially. And you taunt people as if there's an equality or equal system that exists for them to succeed. So you plan for them to fail. You create measures for these people to utilize survival methods, which is just incredible to live in a day of technology, in an age of with so many billionaires. And then we hold them accountable for things we know that they don't have. And then we racially hold them as if they're worse than others because of how they're dealing with their inequalities. It's like, it's a setup, right? And so the system of perpetual punishment is just a setup that allows that abuse to continue. So here we have 12 people incarcerated, 2,000 officers let go, some officers going back to be even more abusive. That's going to be a vengeance streak, right? We have a mayor who just beat his indictment cases by working for the president and deporting other millions of Americans. And our country is just is gone to shit. Let's be honest, right? There is no country. It's almost like the fall of the end of the Roman Empire, where you have like the iconography and the iconology and like the language of democracy, but you don't have any, right? We don't have a democratic state anymore. You know, the far right is going so far right that the left has moved into the Republican spot, and now that Republican spot is now so far right it's a cult. And so I'm afraid that when society fails, those most marginalized feel it the most. And if you really want to judge a society, you can judge it by looking at how it treats its most marginalized people, and by looking at the people it treats in its prisons and jails. How do we rehabilitate people? So we need a system that allows correction to be facilitated within correctional facilities, that will allow prisons and jails to actually make us safer.